Some women don't announce their departure. They don't slam doors, raise their voices, or scatter the ashes of love in the air. They simply stop giving their energy, and the entire world of the man who once took it for granted begins to tremble, because a woman's energy is not noise. It is presence. It is warmth disguised as patience, softness disguised as strength. It is the invisible current that animates the masculine soul, drawing him out of his shadows, giving him reason to rise. When she withdraws, it is not a punishment. It is nature restoring equilibrium. The moon no longer pulls the tide when the ocean grows violent. The flame does not burn for those who refuse to feel its heat. There is a silence that follows, a silence so heavy that even his heartbeat sounds foreign. At first, he does not understand it. He mistakes her absence for space, her quiet for peace. But soon he feels it, the void, that haunting emptiness that once was filled with her laughter, her curiosity, her light. In the psychology of Carl Jung, the woman's energy is not merely emotional. It is archetypal. She carries within her the anima, the bridge to the divine, the vessel through which man perceives the soul. When a man loves a woman, consciously or not, he touches the deepest part of himself, the eternal feminine within his psyche. But when he wounds her, neglects her, or takes without giving, he doesn't just lose her, he loses the mirror of his own soul. And so, when she withdraws, his reality fractures. The world becomes colorless. Food loses taste. Music feels hollow, because what he truly misses is not her body. It's the reflection of life she once offered him. He begins to feel a strange discomfort, the stirring of his shadow. The parts of himself he buried beneath pride, logic, or distraction start to rise like ghosts from a forgotten sea. He starts to remember what it felt like to be seen by her, and how unworthy he felt that gaze. That's the secret most men never speak of. It's not her leaving that breaks him. It's the realization that he was loved by something holy, and did not know how to hold it. The woman, the archetypal feminine, does not disappear into bitterness. She recedes into herself like the ocean pulling back before the tide. She moves into silence not to wound, but to reclaim her essence. For too long, her energy was currency in a market that gave her nothing in return. Now, she spends it inward, on her art, her breath, her healing. She no longer explains her absence, because she no longer owes the world her light. Her withdrawal is not a game of control. It's a sacred act of balance. The moment a woman stops pouring her energy into the unready masculine, she returns to her own divinity, and in doing so, becomes magnetic beyond comprehension. The man, now alone with his silence, meets the shadow he avoided through her affection. Her energy once softened the hard edges of his ego, filled the empty spaces between his distractions, made him feel enough even when he was empty. Now, stripped of her emotional mirror, he faces himself, raw, unedited, and unprepared. This is the first stage of the masculine descent, the encounter with the void. In Jungian terms, it's the initiation of the shadow confrontation, when a man must face the repressed parts of himself he once projected onto her. Every complaint he made about her neediness, every irritation at her emotional depth, every avoidance of her desire for connection, they now echo within him, because they were never truly about her. They were reflections of the parts of himself he refused to integrate. And now, without her energy to sustain the illusion, those shadows come alive. He begins to wonder why he feels empty. He blames circumstance, time, fate, anything but the truth. He doesn't yet understand that what he misses isn't her attention, but the mirror of his own humanity that she carried for him. For the first time, he begins to sense what she once felt, the distance, the disconnection, the ache of reaching for someone emotionally unavailable. This reversal is not punishment. It's karma in psychological form. Energy must balance itself. The one who drained must now feel the absence of what he took. And in that emptiness, something ancient begins to stir. Not guilt, but awareness. He remembers the way her presence felt like home, not because she completed him, but because she reminded him of what completion feels like. The feminine, meanwhile, does not look back. She does not check if he has noticed her absence, because this time her silence is not a test. It's a transformation. In her stillness, she rediscovers the vastness of her inner world. She begins to see how much of her power was spent trying to wake someone who chose to sleep. There is grief in this awakening. Yes, but beneath the grief, there is gold. She begins to feel the subtle return of energy, the spark in her creativity, the clarity in her intuition, the calm in her heart. For the first time in a long time, She feels what it's like to give without depletion, to love without losing herself, to exist without explaining. This is not withdrawal. This is resurrection. In the archetypal dance between man and woman, energy exchange is sacred. When a woman gives her light to a man who does not yet know how to hold it, she becomes both his muse and his mirror. But when she withdraws that energy, he is forced to confront the void she once disguised. This is the alchemy of absence, the silent transformation that happens in both. For her, the detachment becomes empowerment. For him, the loss becomes initiation. The man who once basked in her warmth now wanders through the cold terrain of self-awareness. The echoes of her laughter become whispers of conscience. Her silence becomes a teacher he never asked for but always needed. He begins to dream of her, not as a woman, but as a symbol. In his sleep, she appears as light just beyond his reach, a voice carried by wind, a warmth in the chest that vanishes when he wakes. He starts to realize that she was never his possession. She was his reflection, the living embodiment of his anima, the inner feminine that calls him toward wholeness. And now, without her physical presence, that anima speaks from within. It demands he grow, that he evolve beyond ego, that he becomes capable of presence, not just performance. This is the hidden mercy of her withdrawal. It awakens a man to the divine feminine within himself. Only through losing her does he begin to understand her. There comes a moment, quiet and devastating, when he realizes that all his distractions, the noise, the bravado, the control, were merely shields against the depth she once invited him into. And when those shields fall, he feels both grief and grace. Because what dies is not love. It's the illusion that love was something he could consume rather than consecrate. When a woman withdraws her energy, the world around her doesn't immediately crumble. It dims. At first, he doesn't notice. He assumes the silence is temporary, the distance a game. But the truth is more ancient than his ego allows him to understand. Her absence is not a tactic. It is nature restoring balance. For years, she was a flame, warm, illuminating, endlessly giving. He, drawn by her light, mistook the warmth for permanence. But light is not endless when it burns for one who never learns to reflect it. There is a subtle shift that happens the moment a woman stops pouring her emotional life into a man who takes without presence. It's not anger. It's not punishment. It's alignment. Her nervous system, once addicted to proving her worth through giving, begins to remember what stillness feels like. Her mind, once looping in the anxiety of being enough, begins to grow quiet, and her heart, once stretched thin across invisible distances, begins to gather itself, piece by piece, like waves returning to the ocean that made them. Meanwhile, the man begins to feel something he cannot name. It's not guilt, not yet. It's emptiness, a subtle dissonance where once there was validation. The space that her attention once occupied becomes unbearable. He will scroll, talk, distract himself, but nothing fills it, because what he misses is not her body, not her words, but the mirror she once was. You see, in Jungian terms, every man carries an anima, the feminine image within his unconscious. When he meets a woman who embodies warmth, emotional depth, and intuitive wisdom, he projects his inner anima onto her. She becomes a canvas upon which he paints his soul's missing colors. But projection is fragile. It cannot survive once the woman steps back and stops playing the role his unconscious wrote for her. The moment she stops giving, he is forced to face his own unlit world. The mirror cracks. The silence begins to hum with questions he doesn't want to ask. Who am I without her attention? Why do I feel less alive when she withdraws? This is the first stage of masculine awakening. Not grand, not loud, but hollow. The ego trembles when it no longer receives the energy it once fed on unconsciously. For the woman, this is the beginning of individuation, the process Jung called becoming whole. She is no longer the reflection of his unhealed wounds, no longer the rescuer of his boyhood voids. She is returning to her essence, to the untouched, silent center of her being. And yet, this return is not gentle. The woman feels the pull, the emotional muscle memory that wants to reach out, to fix, to nurture, to explain. But she doesn't. She lets the discomfort rise and pass like a storm. In that restraint, she learns something sacred, Her energy was never meant to convince someone to see her value. Her energy was meant to express her value. When she stops giving away freely, her presence becomes magnetic, not because she tries to be mysterious, but because she simply is. A man feels this instinctively. The difference between a woman who seeks to be chosen and a woman who already has chosen herself. And here lies the paradox. When she detaches, he begins to awaken. When she no longer chases, he begins to question. When her light no longer bathes him, he sees the shadows in himself. This is where the alchemy begins. The energy she withdraws doesn't disappear. It transforms. It stops nourishing the external and begins feeding the internal. Her radiance becomes focused, refined, sovereign. In her silence, she becomes a mirror too, but now a sacred one. Not the mirror that flatters or saves, but the mirror that reveals. Men often learn through absence what they ignored in presence. And in that absence, he begins to meet himself. He remembers her laughter, not as sound but as light. He recalls her gaze, not as approval but as truth. And in the quiet ache of loss, he starts to see the reflection she once held up, the parts of him he never integrated. It is painful, yes, but it is also the beginning of consciousness. Because when a woman stops giving her energy, she doesn't take love away. She takes away illusion. And without illusion, only truth remains. The truth of who he is. The truth of what she has become. And the truth that love without awareness is not love. It's dependency disguised as devotion. So she stands now, radiant in her quiet reclamation. No explanations. No performance. No chase. The world around her feels different. Slower, quieter, almost reverent. Even the air holds its breath when she walks through it. Because she is no longer seeking to be seen. She is the seeing. When a woman withdraws her energy, something ancient stirs within the man. Something is long buried beneath noise, pride, and distraction. It begins quietly, like a whisper he tries to ignore. But over time it grows louder, echoing through every empty space she once filled. At first, he blames her silence. He calls her distant, cold, ungrateful. He convinces himself she's changed, that she has become someone else. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. It's he who has remained the same, while she has evolved beyond the reach of his unconscious grasp. Carl Jung once wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this is where his shadow begins to surface. The parts of him he never wanted to meet, now illuminated by her absence. He begins to feel an unfamiliar void, one that no other woman, no distraction, no success can fill. It's not her he misses, not truly. It's what her energy reflected back to him, the illusion of being whole. Without her warmth, he must face the cold truth of his own emotional poverty. The man who once felt powerful in her attention now feels small. The one who felt confident in her adoration now feels exposed, because her energy had been his unconscious source of validation, the mirror through which he glimpsed the best version of himself. And when that mirror disappears, he meets the shadow. It's not a literal darkness, but a psychological one. The repressed pain, the fear of inadequacy, the unmet longing that he buried long ago. It whispers to him in sleepless nights. You were never taught how to receive love. You only know how to chase control. You mistake power for safety. He resists at first. He distracts himself, scrolls endlessly, seeks attention from others. But the emptiness persists because what he's facing is not external loss. It's internal confrontation. The anima within him, the feminine aspect of his soul, begins to awaken. She is not kind, not soft, not patient. She is the voice of truth, pulling him toward what he's avoided, vulnerability. She demands he feel the emotions he has spent a lifetime suppressing. She asks him to see women not as sources of validation, but as mirrors of his own unlived soul. And this is the beginning of his transformation. In the quiet that follows her withdrawal, he begins to unravel. Memories rise. The mother who was emotionally distant, the ex who tried to love him through chaos, the women he ignored, the feelings he never named. Each memory becomes a fragment of the shadow, calling him toward integration. He begins to see that every woman he called too emotional was only showing him what he refused to feel. Every woman who loved too deeply was reflecting his own numbness. Every woman who withdrew, as she finally did, was the universe giving him another chance to wake up. This is the alchemy of loss, the pain that strips away illusion until only truth remains. But not every man chooses this path. Some will run into another relationship, into busyness, into denial. They will call her crazy, selfish, cold, because to admit the truth would mean confronting their shadow. Yet, the few who stay, who sit in the silence, who allow the eight to teach them, they begin to awaken. They learn that her absence was not punishment but invitation. An invitation to meet the inner feminine, to integrate emotion, intuition, empathy, and humility into their being. And in that integration, the man becomes something new, no longer a seeker of energy, but a generator of it. No longer a consumer of love, but a co-creator of it. The woman's withdrawal was never destruction. It was initiation. She didn't take from him. She showed him where he had been empty all along. She didn't reject him. She rejected his shadow's dominance. And in doing so, she gave him a gift greater than any affection, the opportunity to become whole. For her, this moment is sacred. She doesn't watch him. She doesn't wonder what he's feeling. She doesn't chase to see if he understands. Because the feminine who has remembered her value knows that his awakening is as alone to walk. She knows that love without self-awareness becomes a wound disguised as devotion, and she will no longer wound herself to save someone from their own unconsciousness. This is where her silence becomes a language, and his longing becomes his lesson. The man who once took her energy for granted now feels her absence like gravity, not as punishment, but as purification. For it is through the emptiness that he finally meets his soul. There comes a moment when the woman no longer looks back, not out of pride, not out of spite, but because she has outgrown the version of herself that waited. She walks differently now. Her steps are quieter, but each carries the weight of 1,000 realizations. This is a phase Jung called individuation, when the self begins to separate from the illusions of the ego and the expectations of others. The woman who once measured her worth through the eyes of men now measures it by the stillness within her own chest. The constant giving, the endless explaining, the attempt to prove her love, all dissolve into a sacred silence that hums with power. She no longer needs to pour her energy into half-formed promises or uncertain hands, because she has learned that feminine energy, when unconsciously given, becomes currency for the unawakened. But when it is held, when it is revered, when it flows from awareness, it becomes creation itself. The men who once consumed her energy will feel her absence like a shifting tide, not because she's gone, but because her vibration has changed. Her energy no longer seeks validation. It radiates sovereignty. She becomes what the mystics call the inner temple, where the divine feminine rests not in longing, but in knowing. This woman understands now that silence is not weakness. It is communication with the unseen. It is how the feminine reclaims her intuition, her magnetism, her command of time itself. When she stops explaining, she begins expressing through presence. When she stops giving from emptiness, she starts giving from overflow. And in that moment, the polarity shifts. The men who once ran now pause. They feel the pull, not of need, but of respect. For she has become something they can sense but not own. In Jungian terms, she has integrated her animus, the inner masculine energy that once sought power through men. Now it serves her, giving her direction, structure, and protection from her own self-abandonment. Her inner masculine no longer demands. It defends. It guards her boundaries like sacred walls around a temple. And within those walls, her feminine essence can finally breathe. This is a woman who doesn't chase. She doesn't manipulate outcomes or analyze text messages. Her magnetism is not strategy. It is the natural gravity of wholeness. She is no longer at war with her own softness. Her sensitivity, once seen as weakness, has become her sight. Men feel it, not through words, but through presence. That ineffable stillness that reminds them of something ancient, something they've forgotten in their endless pursuit of conquest. When she enters a room, the air shifts, not because she seeks attention, but because she has reclaimed her attention from the external world and gathered it back into her core. This reclamation terrifies the unawakened man. To him, she seems untouchable, unreachable. But to the awakened, she is the embodiment of truth. Her stillness doesn't reject. It reveals. It shows a man exactly where he stands in relation to himself. If he is unintegrated, he will feel small. If he is conscious, he will feel invited to rise. Because a woman in her sovereignty doesn't demand evolution, she evokes it. Her silence speaks directly to the soul, bypassing all games of ego and attraction. Her energy says, meet me in consciousness, or lose me to the wind. In this way, she becomes a living embodiment of the alchemical feminine, the fire that purifies, the water that heals, the earth that grounds, and the air that liberates. She knows now that to stop giving her energy is not withdrawal. It is alignment. It is the moment she chooses wholeness over half-love, peace over performance, truth over illusion. And from this state of inner sovereignty, she attracts differently. No longer men who feed on her nurturing to avoid their growth, but men who see her as a mirror of their own evolution. No longer relationships built on need, but connections rooted in mutual awareness. This is not a fairy tale ending. It is a beginning of a higher order, because once a woman learns the art of energetic discernment, she no longer loses herself in love. She finds herself through it. The world begins to respond differently to her frequency. Opportunities open, coincidences unfold, and the universe bends quietly in her favor. Not because she chases, but because she aligns. She is no longer the woman who waits to be chosen. She is the one who chooses herself, fully, fiercely, and without apology. And the men who once underestimated her will sense it. They will remember the softness they once took for granted, now cloaked in quiet power. They will feel her energy, not as warmth given freely, but as the sacred fire that can no longer be touched without reverence. Because something in the cosmic order shifts when a woman stops giving her energy to what drains her. She becomes a force of nature again, ungoverned, unbroken, and breathtakingly still. She walks now with a grace that cannot be imitated, a calm that cannot be faked. Her silence hums with the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes. And the world, including the man who once needed her energy to feel alive, now watches in awe, sensing that she has become what every soul secretly seeks, a mirror of the divine. Her detachment is not coldness, it is consciousness. Her distance is not rejection, it is respect. Her silence is not empty, it is full of everything unspoken. And somewhere in the quiet places of his mind, he finally understands. She was never the one who lost him. He was the one who lost himself when he stopped seeing her as sacred. Now, she moves beyond the story, beyond waiting, beyond proving, beyond explaining. And as the sun sets on everything she once was, she whispers, not for him, but for the universe to hear. The woman who walks away in silence isn't weak. She simply sees more.